Hello, our truth warriors, and welcome back to the Atlantic Underground. Now, don't forget, you really need to have a great supplier when it comes to precious metals. And Miles Franklin gives the listener here, that's you, the best prices when you buy from them using our VIP code. Now, our VIP code is AU. Funnily enough, the symbol and atomic code for gold, but it's also the initials of the Atlantic Underground. Now, if you want to contact them at info@milesfranklin.com or take a look on their website, see what kind of thing it is you want, and you're going to find that at milesfranklin.com. Now, today's guest returning with us, absolutely fantastic, is a lawyer who has a keen eye when it comes to law and legislation, and something as a letter again to the Canadian government. Lisa Miron, welcome back to the Atlantic Underground podcast. How are you?
I'm very good. Happy New Year, Chris. Happy New
Thank
Year to
you.
everybody. Yeah, everybody knows that something's afoot in Canada, and so this is definitely the podcast for you to find out.
Thank you. Right now, Justin Castro, Trudeau, boy, has stepped down. Now, this appears to have enacted something that the general public unaware of, and it appears to have handed him what I consider to be a dictatorship, which is quite befitting considering what his father or both fathers, whichever we want to say there, did within their terms. Now, what can you tell me about this aspect of the law and what has actually been enacted with him
So,
stepping down currently?
yeah, so MSM has reported this as a resignation, and that is a clarification that we should first make. Because if you dissect his statement, what he said was, I intend to resign. And so that is not an act of resignation. So he says, I intend to resign. So he retains his full executive powers. He retains his position as prime minister. He's trotting around the world right now. So he is not resigned. And that's the first clue that MSN wants us to not really be concerned about Justin Trudeau, to celebrate. The second thing is that he has prorogued government. And so he needs the governor general to approve his request for prorogation. And prorogation is very, very dangerous because what all he has done is suspend parliament. And before the holidays, we had three parties that were committing to vote for an immediate election. So we were going into January with that, buoyed sense that we were going to get an election. He has prorogued government and he has prevented the parties from voting and calling for that election. So, yes, you are right. The act of prorogation has made him a dictator, and everybody around the world is celebrating his resignation or reporting his resignation. And so, what we really have to know is Justin Trudeau has eliminated his accountability. There was all kinds of investigations into corruption of the Canadian Liberal parties that has been eliminated, and the ability to call for an immediate election has been eliminated. We have no confidence in Parliament. We have no confidence in this government. So it's very dangerous. And we can go into further. And if we don't, in your questions, address some of the additional concerns I have, I'll
Yeah,
bring them up.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Now, one thing that I always looked at and have looked at for many years is taxation. And obviously, the position now that has been formed with him being in place certainly could be a fantastic opportunity for the people living in Canada and probably the people living around the world as soon as they wake up to this. Now, taxation has always been a legal interest of mine on the basis that it is non-contractual and the payment that people make. How legal do you see taxes being?
Well, right now in Canada, taxation is something that we've done for eons, like any other OECD country, like any other country around the world. So, tumbling that apple cart is going to be very big. And I don't I don't foresee that we have that ability right within our grasps. But we have an additional problem in Canada with respect to taxation, in that Justin Trudeau's government presented a legislation to increase our capital gains tax from 50% to 2/3. Okay.
Yeah.
And that did not pass. So that legislation that, that would be what you call, whether or not it's contract or not, between the people. And certainly where our funds are used, or that we're in a perpetual deficit, or that we create inflation through that spending mechanism, there's all kinds of problems to unpack with government spending and deficits. But in this case, we have legislation that has not been passed, and the RCRA, Canadian Revenue Agency, has said that they are going to be collecting the capital gains tax at that 66%, without even the color of law. And so I have a whole bunch of issues with that. Apparently, the remedies for the people are that they can refuse to do it and then get charged interest rates and penalties, right? And of course, the CRA has its own access to courts and a huge infrastructure, and the individual taxpayer does not. And then, or you can pay it and then try to get it back. But either one puts the remedy on the individual. And what I say is that Justin Trudeau's in power. He has remained in power. And as he allows his administrative state to go rogue, completely rogue, right, without the color of law whatsoever, and
Yeah.
collect taxes from people on legislation that has not been passed. So this is like a very big departure from the norm. So he's a
Yeah.
dictator. He's preventing a call from election. He didn't resign. He said he intends to resign after a process. Well, that's a conditioned precedent that who knows, maybe he knows what will be the interruptions of those condition of his ability to resign. He'll have something, right? We have
Yeah.
bird flu, whatever. But in the meantime, Canadians who don't have access to a parliament, right, to even debate this, have an administrative part of the state saying they're going to collect taxes that they don't have legislation for. So, I think the world has to see Justin, sure, call him Castro, dictator, wielding powers where he's basically eliminated the opposition from even voicing this in parliament, and then therefore getting a greater groundswell against these policies, right?
That's it. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but if a government has basically made itself redundant for the time being without leadership, how can they expect people to pay things to the government, especially taxes? Because this is clearly taxation without representation.
I have used taxation without representation in a lot of contexts with respect to the WHO, with respect to the UN, with respect to them, put enforcing laws that are expensive and thus require, or not laws, policies that are, or international treaties or international health regulations that are expensive and require a massive amount of expenditures. And I've always called that taxation without representation. We are perhaps, in a unique situation in Canada where we don't have a parliament, right? And we have taxation without representation. It is a unique situation. Now, they're saying that the prorogation is only until March 24th. But in the meantime, we have a rogue administrative state.
Yeah.
And beyond even the taxation, obviously the administrative state covers a lot of issues. In Canada, we're very concerned with a bill that proposes your hate speech, right, should put you in jail, possibly for life, right? That, just like the taxation bill, hasn't passed. Should we also be concerned about proposed legislations that haven't passed also being, enforced by the rogue administrative state, or even worse, legislations that haven't even been proposed yet? And with this prorogation, there's two additional factors that I want you to know. So one is that there's a precedent in Canada dating back to 2003 that says private members' business, and business is broad, okay? Private members' business is not halted by prorogation. So there is a bill that I've been fighting, and trying to get a lot of awareness around in Canada. It's Bill C-293, right? It talks about expropriation of land,
Yeah.
ending meat agriculture, and that's through the elimination and phasing out of live animal markets, attacking industrial, saying that you prevent pandemics by reducing industrial animal agriculture, and you prevent pandemics by increasing artificial meat protein. So it's just like it's a really, and the subject matter of that bill, we could talk for hours because it hands all of Canada over to through the national focal points of the WHO to the WHO. And
Yeah.
so that bill is a dangerous bill, and there's been a lot of pushback at the grassroots level against that bill.
Yeah.
However, there's that sort of sense that, oh, all these legislations die on the floor with the prorogation. But Bill C-293 is a private members bill. So the agricultural organizations, and you see this tax stuff in the UK that will expropriate essentially land from farmers in the UK. You see the Netherlands who expropriated land under the guise of environmentalism. You see the war in Ukraine, expropriating land and BlackRock picking it up on a dime. And you see that you have a tax in agriculture on Bill C-293. So all the agricultural organizations that called the Liberal parties were told, don't worry, private members bills don't pass. Then subsequently, all MPs for the Liberal and NDP voted that. It got to the Senate. It passed the first reading in the Senate. It's in committee. So the precedent that private members' business doesn't stop means that that bill will, in March 24th, be at that second reading in the Senate. They could, pass that bill March 24th when Parliament returns. And even worse, right? Because private members' business doesn't stop isn't really truly defined. They could hold votes in absentia. They could do all kinds of things
Yeah.
that I am worried about. So that's one, is that private members' business hasn't stopped. And the second is that there's a committee that talks about the procedures of Parliament. And
Yeah.
that committee survives. So you have the situation where they could change how legislation is passed. They could change and make new precedents. This committee is still alive. And so what that means is that we're in a state where administrative state is going rogue on taxes. We don't have the ability to call for an election. And Justin Trudeau's mainstream media cozies report everywhere, this sense of relief. We're getting rid of him. He's resigned, but he said he intends to.
Yeah.
And so, I, like you, believe we're in a state of dictatorship, essentially, in
Yeah.
Canada. And one, JCCF is going to court to challenge the prorogation, and they asked for consent on an expedited basis, and they were refused an expedited hearing on consent by the lawyers for the Crown.
Yeah.
And now they're going to be bringing in a motion for an expedited hearing, and I wish Godspeed to them, because that's a really important case going forward right now.
Yeah. Now, I do have, obviously, I've been looking at many things as always, and I do apologise for my lights today. The strip lights down here are obviously flickering in the underground tunnel. So if anyone's seeing any flickering going on, that's what that is. The underground base is hardwired, so it's it's safe for us to talk about these things. But I think we're going to see things move forward, possibly in a different direction. I do think that the the likes of the World Economic Forum and what we're seeing being said from the US for when Donald Trump comes into power moving forward is tying in perfectly to the plan and the agenda that they want to move forward. And I do think that the very steps that Trudeau has taken now are actually going to tie into that. And I will get to that shortly, people. So please keep watching because right now I want to talk about the taxation, but I will reiterate on what I've just been saying now. Now, if taxation under the rule of law is proven to be contractual and only by consent, would this be considered a deception, a fraud, and ultimately theft?
Well, I don't know if I can speak to the whole broad issue of taxation and strip it down in this conversation. Certainly,
Yeah,
that would require, a lot of work. I can say, we have a situation where there is no representation in Canada officially. We only have an executive branch. We have the Governor General. We have the administrative state, and we have the courts. So we may be able to hold the government account, but no one is taking right now the account for the taxation that isn't even legislation based.
yeah,
Um, so, I can't speak to your broader issues, and you may have better experts for that who, you know, that is, what they're banging in terms of issues. It's not the issue I'm banging, although, the whole system, if we needed to be taxed, why would they print so much money, right? Or if they could just print it out of thin air
yeah,
and use inflation as taxation, which is really what's happening. And so, from an economic point of view, we're getting to a bird flu that's culling massive um, birds in farms,
yeah,
and that is going to increase food prices. We're going to have expensive gas. We're going into expensive gas. That's going to cause inflation. So, notwithstanding that people have less and less money to spend in their pocket, they're going to be taxed through that inflation. And that inflationary tax is something I think we could do a better job in educating the general population to push back on it. All the expenditures are, billions of dollars are just leaving Canada, and that's the same for most OECD countries. Um, they're going to foreign wars, or they're going to foreign lands, likely to, and this is just likely to
yeah,
bribe those officials into voting for, the UN Migration Compact, which is the open border requirement of moving people constantly. And, knowing the Migration Compact and getting people educated on that is really important, or getting them on board with the WHO pandemic treaty, the international health regulations, even if it's against their interests. We're moving to what is a digital feudalism society. And, dismantling all of taxation, I think we have some fights that we can focus on first. But everybody has their fight in their interest. It sounds like it's one of your most important interest is to dismantle the taxation. I'm not sure how to, but more broadly, at least in Canada right now, we should have the ability to claim that the CRA, in trying to collect taxes under a law that hasn't been passed, is committing theft.
yeah,
That is theft. If you don't even have the statute. Do you lose your employee-employer relationship protection, right? So, if you're a bona fide an employee that has to, do X, Y, Z, usually it's the employer who has that liability. But if you
Yeah.
so depart from what are the norms, then you can be held personally accountable. And what we have here is a situation where, you know what? These people saying they're going to collect taxes where laws haven't been passed. Are they personally liable for the theft? We are in unprecedented times because these are questions that we've never had to pose. And it's interesting. It's also very disconcerting because a rogue administrative state broadly is difficult for people in Canada to contend with without a parliament.
Yeah. And that's it. I've always been under the impression that, you've got employers that will take the tax from your pay before you receive it, and they're legally obliged by the very government to do that. But I'm not saying people shouldn't pay the taxes. I mean, it's completely up to themselves. But taxes are paid in Canada once every year. Now, surely there must be something in legal recourse where people can say to their employers, please don't take the money out of my wages to pay the government. Please pay it to me. And if people save that in their account, they pay the taxes once every year. Is there any reason why people couldn't do this? And then at the end of the year, when they have to pay the taxes at that point, then they can pay the taxes, should the taxes be legally required, and people feel that they are no longer funding the tyranny that they're living under within that country.
So there's a lot of different kinds of taxes that employers collect that you pay at the source when you buy things. I'll tell you an example. I have a bill. It's either, I think it's my Enbridge bill. It
Mhm.
was $25 in Enbridge bill. Last week it was our last month it was $127 in carbon tax. Then there were other fees and taxes like HST on top of it. So from $25 of gas, I had a $325 bill.
Yeah.
So, it's insane. It's the rape of our pocketbook and our ability to, participate in the economy. And it's a war on GDP. Like this whole C40, where you end up with zero meat or dairy and only 3 items of clothing, and you're parceled into mandatory densification, which is that how LA is going to be rebuilt? In an equity performing LA. So you have the idea people are being completely blindsided that how we managed economies is going to be how we manage economies now.
Yeah.
And so all of the taxes and policies are war on GDP. We have warnings by tax watchers, we're going to lose investment in Canada. That's right.
Yeah.
All of these policies are the war on the middle class, right? They're the war on GDP. And once you can control a population and almost make them slaves through CBDC, which is
Yeah.
instant taxation, and digital ID, my view is we're in a situation where we are inverting what type of society we are in, like more broadly than taxation. We are in a rights-based society and we are pivoting to an access-based society, right? In a rights-based society, until you've done something wrong and it's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and you've had the opportunity to know the law, the charges against you, get disclosure, cross-examine the other side, have a lawyer representation, get a judge or a jury, and have the ability to appeal, right? All of that was the basis. And, we've been slumbering that we're losing this and moving to an access-based society where you put up your QR code and you get access to your life that was otherwise legal just last year. So, oh, you got the right jab in order or whatever,
Yeah.
then you get access to the shopping malls or, gym or whatever it is. Well, that social credit system is an access-based society, and we're moving at it so that we are just merely the sum of our data, where an algorithm takes us and decides through AI parceling of our actions, decisions, and verbalizations, what, or even equity, things like our skin color that we can't even change, whether or not we get access to, items. And that's difficult. That, in my view, it's the most important thing that we should be talking about, is that these government policies are just channeling us along to an anti-human result. And we are the last generations alive before the fulsome implementation of it. And if we lose our voices or we are cowards with those voices, we will lose the fight for humanity for all time.
Yeah.
I think taxation is an important issue, but for me, the biggest issue is just looking at the policies and the reduction of humanity into AI parceled data and the control of us through smart cities, right? CBDC. Right now, shame-based, oh, you shouldn't talk about that because, insert, like first it was, don't talk about that. Why? Because grandma might die. Don't talk about that because nurses are in long-term, are working 24/7. Don't talk about that because of the war in Ukraine. That's all shame-based censorship.
Yeah.
And then we get to censorship that puts you in jail for your speech, right? We're moving into very dystopic times. We are going to be known online and known in our smart city.
Yeah.
That pen is an interim pen, right? And so the idea, well, this is how we always managed economies before. We want an economy. We have policies that if we really look at them, and legislation that we really look at, and, the technology, if we really look at rolling out, is really about changing a rights-based society to an access-based society, and then being governed into a slavery system. And DEI, makes us look at the history of slavery and shaming people from, their accidental birth and situations now. While the biggest power grabs in slavery are happening in front of us, right?
Yeah.
And so you what you do is you fund the Greens and you ESG and DI, you fund them so that those people are all silenced from I guess fighting what is the real danger to humanity. So you co-opt them with our tax dollars.
Yeah. That's it. Now, just run those numbers by me once more for your Enbridge bill. You used $25 of gas, is that right?
Yeah, I use $25 of gas
And you,
and
and your total bill was
$325. I had 127 in carbon tax. I had $40 in HST. There was a delivery charge. There was another charge. And, some of them might be legitimate Enbridge charges, but the actual gas was $25.
that's
And
insane.
so that's insane, right?
Yeah.
That is insane. The next, there's no rhyme or reason because my next bill was also $25 in gas and my carbon tax was $97. So, who knows? Maybe I got charged less delivery or something like that that worked it out. But it was, again, that one was close to 300, was in the 260s. And so
Yeah, I'm just
that,
wondering why anyone's never challenged this carbon tax in Canada, because from what I understand, Canada has the largest boreal forest, and the amount of carbon that those trees filter actually takes Canada below the net zero number that
oh,
they're trying to
this whole
achieve.
thing is a scam. I have an environmental science degree with a minor in chemistry. I was educated on the greenhouse gas effect. And you know what? Let's just get back to the laws of thermodynamics. If you're going to cook your pasta water, friend, if you're going to cook your pasta water, do you take the flamethrower to the air in the kitchen and expect something that has almost negligible thermal mass to transfer heat to boil your pasta water? It'll never happen. You can have your furnace on forever and it'll never be hot enough for you to take a bath.
Yeah,
This whole thing is a scam. It's call it a hoax, call it whatever you want. I don't care. Call me a denier. I don't care. The whole thing is a scam.
yeah,
And there are arguments that you can make that the boreal forest is pulling out carbon and that we're whatever. But the whole thing is the carbon allotted budget that you get. So Global Covenant of Mayors will come in, Marxify, Lenify, Climify your city, and your city, your town will get a carbon budget. And then C40 principles drills that carbon budget down to you, and it's based on climate justice, etc., etc. This is about digital feudalism and having an underpinning to do it. And I used to tiptoe around it because, yeah, you can actually make arguments that carbon dioxide is pulled out by trees. I posted recently about a 2009 video I found of the, I guess he's, the head of the energy department in the US. And he stated that if you change the colors of the roofs to whites, it was the equivalent of taking away all the cars for 11 years. And so, right. And so, notwithstanding, there are solutions, for climate change.
yeah,
The dialogue really is anti-life, right? Don't have kids because of climate change. Don't eat meat because, climate change. You know what? Don't produce don't produce nitrogen fertilizer because of climate change. So, we've lost the whole story when the attacks on food, us eating, is how we solve for climate change.
yeah.
I mean, no, go shove it. Go shove the whole climate story. I'm so tired of it, and we have to voice that. It's not just a little bit of a scam. It's
It's
the
massive.
biggest scam. It's the most fantastical scam.
Yeah.
No.
But if I'm right in thinking, everything alive is a carbon-based organism. And if they
Yeah.
achieve this net zero, that means everything is dead.
Well, so we're a carbon life form, right?
Yeah,
So you and I we're a carbon life form. There's the photosynthesis is literally made up of two components. So photosynthesis, the basis for all life on the planet, woohoo, all life is made of two components, CO2
yeah,
and H2O. Which one you're going to have war on? So you're going to go on CO2 next to the H2O is bad. Water's bad. We have to eliminate water. These
yeah,
guys are complete alarmist lunatics
yeah,
that control the dialogue. So 6 CO2 and 6 H2O makes glucose,
yeah,
right? Right. And O2. Oh, right? Photosynthesis makes O2. But then O2 and glucose in your cells and every other microbe, mammal, vertebrate, invertebrate, whatever, you name it, all of the entire life cycle of life takes that O2 and glucose, cellularly and produces CO2. So you have to convince me if we take away all of the CO2 of our breathing and everything else, and by the way, when you die, you release CO2. So everything dying, off gassing of rocks produces CO2.
Yeah.
Volcanic activity produces CO2. You know, no. No, 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 won't have anything. Yes, we're all carbon life forms, and
Yeah.
they're just making war on one.
And I believe from what I've seen within scientific data, which is their very data that they produce as well, that the main cause for any kind of warming on the planet is down to water vapor. And this then ties into obviously the fact that there's weather manipulation going on clearly around the world. We are having very strange weather, but it seems to go hand in hand with the very temperatures, which they say are increasing. But at the very same time, these temperatures are also increasing at the same percentage rate on different planets in the universe. So it's very odd. Now we could talk about that all day, but I do want to keep on track with what we wanted to talk about. Now,
Yeah.
the government again. What is the executive branch and what powers do they have?
So there's three branches in government. Your executive and your legislative, that's our parliament, that's where we vote, that's our Senate, and then your judiciary. And your executive is held to account by the other two. And so once you've eliminated your parliament, you're left with only your courts to hold your executive in account.
Yeah,
The full list of their powers is truly depends also on the British North American Act and the division of powers because some powers were reserved
yeah,
for the provinces. So the full enumeration of them, like they don't have help yet through the basis of WHO national focal points and the idea of creating uh, by making and weaponizing disease into an international issue, then if you make everything really important an international issue, and then you embed those international issues as a mandatory all hands on deck, the federal government, the executive government, is using these international relationships to then go and drill down into every aspect of government and blowing up that administrative state that functions.
yeah,
So typically people believe that when you vote for a party, they bring in and they appoint the new minister of energy or they appoint the new minister of health or but the administrative state has gotten so strong and so embedded by the national focal points of international organizations that the policies year after year and government after government are being now almost completely and exclusively run by policies that have to conform with international law.
yeah,
So, because the executive branch gets to do the international policy, the foreign relations, they have set up systems through climate and UN, through big disease, to then go in and modify, right? Oh, in order to comply with these treaties that we sign, we are going to have to change how we govern almost every aspect of our government. So, when Trump says he's going to, defund and get out of the UN or the WHO, what really has to happen is you have to root out the national focal point system. And I can do a whole talk on national focal points. I have done one for Dr. Peter McCullough, and I recommend you look it up because
yeah.
it's very interesting.
Yeah. Funny enough, I messaged Peter McCulloch this morning again to see if he can come on. Last time we had you on, obviously, we discussed at length Bill C-293. I do recommend anybody who hasn't seen that interview with Lisa, go back. It's on the Atlantic Underground Podcast.com and see that interview solely about C-293, the bill that they're trying to put in
Yeah.
Canada. Now,
Yeah.
Canada does appear to be something it is not. And you did mention the British, the BNA Act, the British North American Act there. And I do want to get onto that as well as some other things as well. But Canada does appear to be something it is not, and it has been said that it is a registered corporation or business, and certainly not under the employment of its citizens. What are you aware of in regards to the standing of Canada, the name Canada, assumed to be the country of Canada? And is it actually a registered corporation with the likes of Dun& and Bradstreet, which is a business registry service?
I would love to know more about this. That is not my strength. I do focus on areas that I'm mostly interested in.
Yeah.
This is interesting to me though, so it is something that I am going to be digging into. I have been focusing a lot on smart cities, CBDC, recently a lot of work on FDA,
Yeah.
corruption, and of course this pro issue of prorogation. But this is not the first time. And Chris, if you want to tell me some great resources
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to start that journey, because you know I've I'm a lawyer now of 24, 25 years. And I have an environmental science degree, a minor in chemistry, an LLB and an LLM. And I've sued the government, and I've had a firm, and I've been in-house in the telecom and tech sectors. I've been in-house in the auto sectors. I have a busy family life. One of the things that happens in life is that you focus on the areas that keep you busy.
Yeah,
And certainly my expertise in a lot of different areas has made me strong in terms of analyzing legislation, and ferreting out the narratives.
yeah,
But that doesn't mean I have an expertise in everything. And this is,
yeah, yeah. No, I understand.
yep,
Yeah, I mean,
yep.
what I'll do, I will put a link in this video for people to see, which talks about the illusion of Canada. Now, there was a merger of Upper and Lower Canada back in 1840. Which formed the province of Canada. Now, the American Civil War was backed by Great Britain, who built ships and armed the Confederacy, which then destroyed the Union ships. And this is history that most people are unaware of. Now, Lincoln actually sought reparations for the damages caused after they won the war there. And they went straight to Great Britain and said, we want, they were prepared to go to war with Great Britain, basically, because of the damage and the involvement that they had. But Great Britain refused, and in order to make peace, they actually offered the taxation of Canada to settle those very reparations, which people are unaware of. Now, this is where the British North American Act of 1867 comes into play, because it received royal assent and created a united colony known as the Dominion of Canada. Now, this act is defined as a British possession, to be any part of a dominion, and defined as a colony, which is what Canada was defined as, same as many different countries under the Commonwealth at that time, and I do believe still to this day. So that very Dominion of Canada was then formed. But therefore, it's not an independent country, which people of Canada think it is. And as I say, I'm going to link the information to this documentary in the show notes because it's very powerful. And when you go and look it up yourself, you'll probably be horrified that this is the case. But the big question is, in regards to this, is does Canada have the rights to enact its rule over the people that live there? And when we really do get into this and that side of the law, it looks like they don't. And it's actually even goes back to the death of Queen Victoria, and this Queen Victoria, over years, her dying and no longer the crown having any kind of power over Canada, has come up in many conversations that I've had over the years. Queen Victoria had bearing on legal rights in Canada when the Crown Corporation was in place. But when she died, it lost its power. And this is something that people really need to research. But what I do urge people is to watch that information in the documentary that I will put in the links. Now, Governor General keeps coming up. Um, what I was wondering, and again, Governor General comes up in the history that I've just been talking about then, but how does a Governor General play a part in all of what's going on now? And what real power does a Governor General have?
So we have always, been mollified with the idea that she is a figurehead only, that she has very few roles, and that her role is not important. Interestingly, Mary Simon, who is our Governor General, was appointed by Justin Trudeau. So she is a uh, Justin Trudeau appointee. However, right? For someone who has very little power,
Hmm.
and she's supposed to be, the official arm of the crown. For someone who has very little power, she has now succeeded in holding all of Canada hostage,
Yeah,
right? All its citizens, our First Nations, everybody, and created a situation where Justin Trudeau is a dictator.
yeah,
So the idea that she is a figurehead only, while we think abdicated her role entirely. A lot of people are getting on the horn. They're calling her, they're voicing their displeasure, they're writing letters. I have written in a very extensive letter to her, and I indicated, even if she is doing this, right, negligently, it's one thing, but if she's doing it, to enact some kind of coup, or
yeah,
she has malevolent intent, then certainly she should be held personally liable. And that she doesn't have the color of her institution anymore when she is either doing it for partisan political, or worse, right? We have a situation where he says, I intend to resign. He's eliminated parliament, and we have all kinds of possibilities for him to enact martial law
yeah,
under, the WHO international health regulations. And oh no, there's, a Holodomor pandemic coming through the bird flu, or what have you. And anybody who thinks that that is, you know, too far afield and not probable is just misremembering the atrocities Canada was put through Trudeau and his COVID era.
yeah.
So we were always presented with the idea that the Governor General is a figurehead that doesn't do a lot. And now she's suspended all the functions in Parliament that would enable an election.
Yeah. That's it. Now, I don't know whether this is going to be within your wheelhouse or not, but obviously this ties into things like property rights and land rights within Canada. And obviously the term allodial title does come into play. Are you aware that if people of Canada, if they actually own their property and land, and do they have allodial title? Or is it still under crown land? And would the sovereignty of the people change that within Canada?
So the last part, I can't relate it to what you're saying, but the first part is that, there's crown land,
Yeah,
and then there's reserve land. Um, and I'm looking into a lot of Aboriginal, First Nation issues just through an acquaintance friend of mine who's
yeah,
just, a real source of information. And then I have myself had a lease from a native group for a cottage I had. and their land was leased from the crown.
Right.
So, you have those issues.
So
You have,
like 100-year leasehold like they have in England.
yeah, they have these leaseholds, right? Which in some ways I find, that's problematic. But as your lease rolls down, it's renewed with the band in 25-year increments. As your lease rolls down, your property has less and less value. And so as soon as it's renewed, it's a good time to change hands because then your property value rises. And the theory is, well, the natives will never um, take it back from you. Uh, don't worry. But no one ever presents the idea, well, the crown will never take it back from the natives. No one ever presents that idea.
Yeah.
So there's definitely something to look at in the reserve system, in the crown land system. Crown land has always been uh, positioned like that's where you would go hunting, right? I'm from the north. You'd go on crown land. You wouldn't go on a private property.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you have in Bill C-293 the idea of land use policies, right? You changing, which allows for expropriation or for no longer you can't use it for any, that commercial.
Sorry about that, guys. We had a little technical issue there, and we just lost something for a moment, but we're back on track again. So here we go again. Now, we were just talking about property rights and stuff there. People of Canada, from what I can see within the law, it appears that the people of Canada always had sovereignty. And again, I'll put the link to that documentary within the notes here. And basically, have had this de facto government implemented under a deception. Now, what I think people will find kind of unusual is this was a deception actually initiated by Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and that was under the Charter Rights and Freedoms that was signed into place that most people think protect them. The baton appears to have been passed from his father's legacy and now passed down to his illegitimate son. Um, we can probably safely say that Justin Trudeau isn't in charge, and there's probably very much so a huge organization behind the scenes that nobody's particularly aware of. And these people are just figureheads and puppets for that very establishment. What concerns me right now is that the USA are voicing their opinions that they want to take many countries under their own belt, and Canada is going to be one of those. Now, if the US and the administration behind what it wants to do, these organizations that do run the world, are very well aware that Canada was never really Canada anyway because of the legal title and the things that hadn't been put into place since Queen Victoria. Would it be possible that the US could just take Canada for themselves? Is that something where a bullet wouldn't be fired? Do you think the people would welcome it? There's certainly been a lot of talk about them becoming the 51st state now for the past few weeks. But is there some kind of loopholes here that they're going to use to just make this happen? What are your thoughts on this?
So yeah, it's in the news out of nowhere, isn't it? And first looking at the dynamics, you have all of a sudden Justin Trudeau, who said in 2015 that Canada will be the first post-national state. So we'll be the first post-national state. What's a post-national state?
Yeah.
Right? What is that? Right? He should have his feet should have been held to the fire when he indicated that, right? And then we have the UN Compact of Migration, which requires two OECD countries constant migration on a sustained basis, like never stop, never stop, never stop. And nobody really talks about that. Then you have, for the most part, the right aligning up until this point, anyways, with Trump because his policies are anti-woke,
Yeah.
right? Because he just he's not for the UN WHO, which is the threat of globalism that most people who are aware want to repel. And then he suggests the model of globalism, which is regionalization. So you regionalize an area, whether it's the EU, Pan-Africa, right? And we have some interesting structures within Pan-America that most people are not aware of, and I have a certain amount of awareness on it. The first is the Pan-American Health Organization, and all the national focal points for all the countries within Pan-America are run through PAHO. So, when I talk about the national focal point system, it's run through PAHO. Then you have that are you aware of the Declaration of Pan America? Or
No.
the Declaration of North America, the DNA?
Oh, yeah. Because I was looking into that yesterday, based upon the areas that I'm trying to navigate at the moment on the rights of an
So
organization to take over. Yeah.
if your viewers don't know, look up the DNA, the Declaration of North American. And the Declaration of North America was signed by Justin Trudeau and Biden, or whoever he is.
Yeah.
And so that was signed, and it declares the Declaration of North America as a parallel, in my
Yeah.
view, right, to the Declaration of Independence. So if the Declaration of Independence starts the US, the DNA signed by Justin Trudeau and Biden,
Yeah.
demented ice cream, slurping man, then that starts the whole North American venture,
Yeah.
right? And then you have, and that's the bilateral component. I think Mexico signs it as well.
Yeah.
Then you have, after the DNA being signed, you have the equivalent. So the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights. You have an equivalent to the Bill of Rights being signed by Anthony Blinken
Huh.
and Melanie Jolie. And that is based on equity, aka communism. Am I allowed to swear here?
Say whatever you like. I always do.
Okay, well, fucking communism. Equity's communism. It's the same amount of calories. It's the same amount of lifespan. You can all be dead at 35. It's ultimate, government control. It's Marxism, Leninism, it's Mayo, it's Pol Pot. Equity is that. And if you think it's otherwise, you're a fool.
Yeah.
And so the idea of this next declaration signed by Jolie and Blinken changes the Bill of Rights in the US to this new broad Declaration of North America, new North American Act, and it changes it into equity. So it removes everybody's rights and allows the government to enforce what it decides is equitable. And so, I find that extremely concerning. So
Yeah.
it's
Because
concerning.
if I'm right in thinking that this DNA alters, funnily enough, there's a DNA altering thing anyway, this DNA alters the position of the countries together, like a North American Union. They have basically enacted a precursor. They've all been working together on this, and now the baton gets passed to the next administration that come in that know this is in place, and then allows them to be able to take these countries, which is not something that's ever been mentioned up until the past few weeks, because it's almost like these things have been passed, ignored, and nobody's really understood the true power and the ability of what this act has.
Yeah, so I don't think any American is versed on the DNA. Like if you polled 1,000 of them, you know, you need to poll about 5,000 to find one who's
Yeah.
aware of the DNA and how dangerous that is. And that, Biden or whoever that demented man is signed it. And, whether you think he has his wits about him or someone else is pushing his wheelhouse, I think it all gets back down to the BIS, right?
Yeah.
Um, the ultimate the ultimate colonialism
Yeah.
governing us through the Federal Reserve in the US or the Bank of Canada. All those private banks are where the power really goes.
Have you seen? Have you
So
seen? Have you seen?
I
Have you
knowing
seen?
about the
Sorry. Have
knowing
you
about
seen
the
the? Have
knowing
you seen
about
the
the
back?
DNA
Yeah. Yeah.
made me very hypersensitive to the suggestion that we become the 51 state. And now it's positioned that since there's so many people who hate Trudeau, he says, no, Canada's great and we have a great system and we're a great people. Well, he's just shit on us for, saying Canadians and all our heritage are shite for the entire duration from 2015 to present, and he wants to get rid of the whole idea of Canada, and he's a uber globalist, and
Yeah.
so now he positions himself as against Canada becoming the 51 state, and that just looks like a total manipulation to shove all of those who are for an election, for proper government, for law and order, and who are anti-globalists, positions them because we like Trump, that we should bite on this 51st state. So they're testing the waters with it, and
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of people who I think now who have been paid off essentially to try to position it as a desirable thing. And I have a really good friend in the freedom movement in Dr. Sansone, and he's like, "Why would you want to take on our share of the debt?" like everyone's like, well, the U.S. is protecting Canada, and that's causing X. And it's like, why would any Canadian want to take on a share of the debt? We're in
Absolutely.
interesting times.
And that's it. And you mentioned the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank of all world central banks. Have you ever actually seen their building over in Basel?
No, yeah, I don't know. Can you pop it up online? Like, can you share it with the
If anyone wants to look up, go and look up the Bank of International Settlements. The building is a replica of the Tower of Babel. And when people realize what the Tower of Babel is from ancient scripture,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
it certainly clearly defines what I think its goal is moving forward. And this whole thing of connecting countries, the one world government, the one world system, the new world order, the World Economic Forum, bringing everything together along with the likes of the United Nations under sustainable development. This is the goal. So we shouldn't really be surprised when we see all of a sudden under this new presidential leadership, so-called leadership, we well know who's pulling the strings in the background. But at the end of the day, this is the agenda that they want. And when we look at the likes of the World Economic Forum, who have instilled in every government around the world, every member of parliament is a young global leader now. Justin Trudeau, signed everything off to be the pilot scheme for this program. We shouldn't be surprised where we are right now because this is all part of the plan. There's nothing really here that appears to be strange or random when I really take a good close look at it. This is all by design. Is this how you're seeing it as well?
Well, I wonder who got to Trump personally. Like, I'm not looking at this all on its face value just yet. And the proof is going to be in the pudding. I do think the BIS are the ones pulling the strings.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah,
also think they have a satanic Luciferian view of the world, which
yeah,
the biggest thing about Luciferians is a divide and conquer, right?
yeah,
So it's got to, pit right against left, religion against religion, indigenous against white, whatever it is that they need to drill into, that's what a Luciferian will do because it allows them to conquer through the divide. The divide is very, very
Oh yeah.
useful. Um,
But this is something that
and
this is something
and
that's
beyond
happening.
that, though, they, you know, what happened in the Bible to Babel, right? They weren't able to complete it.
Mhm.
And if they are very much biblical, and I'll tell you, there is, the terminology of the New World Order in my Bible, I think it's in Genesis 6 or 9, it's the title of right after the flood has decimated every single person on earth. The New World Order is Noah and his children. So, these are people who are biblical. And one of the things that they fear in the Bible is that their kingdom on earth, their satanic kingdom on earth, where they have their power, comes to an end um, when Jesus Christ returns. And these are biblical people. They want us to be separated from what power comes from a relationship with God. I really believe that. And I have a very strong relationship with God, or I work on it.
Yeah.
And so, what you have right now on the war against people is they desperately want to stack the deck for this final countdown, right? And so Luciferians are going to try to, first of all, always eliminate Christians and Christianity. That's their first, or, if you look at crimes of the occult, in a 1980s manual from the FBI, you'll see how to identify them. And they're all the logos that are going out in every globalist organization. And every single time DEI, their religion, comes through an organization, their logos go to an occult logo. Just look it up,
Yeah.
right? Right. And so they have gamed and entered every single organization at the top in order to push through their agenda. Every single
Oh
organization,
yeah.
even if it's a farmer's market, right?
Oh yeah.
They'll change the farmer's market to be all about crafts. And then eventually you're not going to be able to get your farmer's goods. They've gamed everything
Yeah.
and they think they can win,
That's
or
it.
they're trying to, right?
When you look at the monopoly of the likes of BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street, it's all intentional again for the control. But what people don't realize is for years, this Agenda 2030, which used to be Agenda 2021, um, is infiltrated. If you live in a little village in the middle of nowhere and you think none of this affects you, if you have a council for that area that takes care of the streets and cleans things and makes sure that the lights come on of a night, that is infiltrated by this very agenda, which is now Agenda 2030, right down to the grassroots level of the tiniest little villages of the world. This is how big the
Yes,
span
yes,
and control
yes,
mechanism has
yes.
become. But most people are unaware of it, and I do implore people to go out there and research this themselves and look into it because that is the ultimate sphere of control. How we get out of this at this point, I don't have the answers for that. I think
I,
stuff.
I really, I really feel, and for everybody out there, that every organization is right now currently made up until they staff it completely with AI and robots of people. In
Mhm.
humanity, and the love that we have for each other is far bigger than their constraints. No matter what we think in terms of how great their control mechanism is, there is something that unites us that they can never get at.
Yeah.
I remember reading, and I can't remember his name. He was um, a Jewish doctor tortured in the Holocaust, and he kept saying they can't get here. The force here and the way that we are connected and the way we are connected with God, it's beyond what they can control. It is beyond what they can control. And the only thing that we need to give each other is hope. And one thing I know for sure is there's 365 ways in the Bible that says, be not afraid.
Yeah.
One for every day. And so, what I wish for every single one of you is hope to your dying breath. And while we discuss these disgusting human beings who have nefarious plans, they are no better than you, they are no smarter than you, they
Yeah.
are only organized. So, get organized, people.
That's it.
And
People need to realize we need to stop fighting each other and that we do have a common enemy. And if we come together, we no longer have that overarching tyrannical power destroying our lives. And we just need to come together. We need to talk, love each other, as you said, and make sure that we see this through. Because if we don't stop this now, we're responsible for not stopping it, and the future generations, your children, your grandchildren, whoever, are going to be the ones to suffer. Now, here's a word I want to ask you about. What does
yep.
ratify mean?
Well, use it in a sentence and use it in the sentence that you want me to explain it to, because words have often the meaning that changes depending on the sentence.
I'm talking in the position of the government now. If they need to ratify something to enable its power against humanity, what would ratify mean? It keeps popping up all the time with the government side of things that these enactments need to be ratified.
So they are weaponizing everything in terms of the law, and the law seems to just completely ceases to have moral authority once it's a weapon against the people. And so ratification, in some contexts means push it through the Senate, right?
Yeah.
Ratification could mean I've seen in a version of the WHO pandemic treaty where it becomes ratified on the signature of the person from the representation of that country. So ratification is diluted now to and weaponized to mean such little things in terms of what it may contextually have meant. And then you're seeing, well, okay, a treaty has to be ratified, and in the context of whatever country, that may mean approval by the House or the Senate. However, you have Bill C-293, which is being pushed through under the auspices of something else, which is the domestication of the pandemic treaty and the international health regulations. So it ends up being ratified through slippery, cheap mechanisms where they don't discuss what the international instrument will actually do. They put it in a domestic instrument and they push it through the WEF control of Parliament. And so, it's not an accident, in my view, that Bill C-293 is at the Senate, remains at the Senate despite the prorogation. And you can see it being the color of law to do horrific things to people,
Yeah.
right? Everybody wants accountability and they want to jump to accountability and they want to I want to make them all responsible.
Yeah.
And my view is this, in the middle, we did not hold Nuremberg in the middle of a field in Russia, right? We didn't do it on the beaches of Normandy. We didn't do it in the middle of a cattle car on the way to Auschwitz. We didn't do it until we won. And so there's all this we need accountable. By all means, throw your lawsuits up, go after your representatives and try to hold the fire to their feet. By all means,
Yeah.
do it because
Yeah.
people respond to where they perceive power is. All we have to do is actually change where power is, and that's through our own collective voices. It's not through anything else. We have to return the power to us. The idea that our power is voting is the illusion, right? They've implemented that. Our power actually is personal, and it involves us using our voices in our neighborhoods and locally And they want censorship because they don't want the voices who can actually pierce the veil. They don't want anyone who can pierce the veil speaking. Um, so this whole law and this whole, the idea of, sorry, going after Nuremberg too soon,
Yeah.
focus on winning. And what that means to me is rooting out every single DEI climate alarmist paid, spook at the local level.
Yeah.
Make it so anything they say in their mainstream media is seen exactly for what it is, paid propaganda by the BIS.
Yeah.
Make it so our voices, and to the BIS, you're wrong. Your view on humanity is wrong. I've God within me, and so do you, and you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong, and you're horrid, and you can't win, and you won't win, and it doesn't matter whether I'm alive or dead. That's the truth.
Oh yeah. And if we all play our part, we'll bring the house down. Now, speaking of things that don't appear to be as they are on the surface, and certainly the deceptions, um, when you first started studying to be a lawyer and you were looking into things and you got into the likes of legalese, how shocked were you that the terminology of so many things out there don't actually mean what most people out there think it does?
Well, I think, as a young student with, my whole life ahead of me, I wanted, obviously the trappings of school or, the system itself. I was able to figure it out. I was smart enough. And I saw both that the laws were simply meant for the clever to figure out how, to avoid them in a legal way, right? I saw all of the systems, um, with a healthy amount of skepticism, but I also had a fair amount of trust, about the front-facing world that I was facing. It wasn't until the COVID era restrictions came in
Yeah.
and that the deception solidified for me. And of course, now I read everything. And I wasn't prepared for a one world government, as an ideology. I wasn't prepared to get to that stage. And then I thought, well, what are the chances? Like, it's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, and you keep tossing heads. What are the chances that, all these OECD countries are passing the same things? What are the chances that it's not, don't they have their local issues going on in their government? And I sort of just woke up to what's the probability of this? It doesn't make any sense. And what I always do is take points that I do know
Yeah.
and I put a ruler through them. And then I extend that ruler to see where it's going. That's what I do.
Yeah.
And then I look to prove that by what points should be there. If I'm right. If I'm right, I'm going to find a law that says this. If I'm right, I'm going to find a legislation or a bylaw or, a policy says this. If I'm right, and I just kept doing that.
Yeah.
And so I came at this not from somebody who was extremely awake, but like for instance, arbitrary. So there's I think it's section 7 of our Charter of Rights that you don't have the right, to have the law. It has to be applied in an arbitrary fashion,
Mhm.
or your rights removed. Um, anyways, I'll have to look it up. But I started seeing the double entendre of this arbitrary,
Yeah.
and in that, if arbitrary was interpreted instead as, the opposite of systematic. And so long as you removed the rights in a systematic fashion and it was applied like equitably, that you
Yeah.
could do it. And I was seeing that there, certainly if you look at my reading of Bill C-293, you can see how everyone's nudged, right, to read without a critical mind. And I think I gonna say kudos to my father. He was a very, um, he is a very man's man.
Yeah.
I always like to say, he's the first misogynist I ever knew, and I love him very much. Um, his views on women, I remember him saying, "You're the first woman I respect," and I thought, "Oh, geez, that's you know." Um, but when I was a little girl, he didn't have sons. He said to me, Lisa, I think it was 3 or 4. He says, "You're getting into a car or something." Yeah, I was going to be driving with somebody, not him. And he said, "You look both ways. You don't trust the person you're in the car with you just because they're an adult or just because they're older or just because they have authority. You think for yourself. You look at your world and you think for yourself, right? And if something's wrong, you speak up, right? Because otherwise you'll be in a car crash. If you see a car coming and they don't see it and you don't speak up, you'll be in a car crash." And he got down really low when he told this to me, very, very important. And I thought to myself, yeah, I got a thing for myself. And it's something that I've been able to apply my whole life. And so, the idea that now we're taking kids and we're having them brainwashed or educated through the schools, through the new Disney. Like I looked at this new Disney advertisement and it was like this horror movie about like, I don't know, really gross dead things coming up and grabbing you. And I'm like, it's just the total inversion of what Disney was, right? Like, can you imagine at 6 o'clock, we're going to sit down on a Sunday and watch horror movies with my family? No. So he was responsible, I think, for my at least ability to think critically.
Yeah. Now, can you remember what the word person is defined as in the Black's Law Dictionary?
Well, I think I could go get it, but I
Yeah.
know
No, I'll tell you
yeah,
because
I actually, no,
it's been a
listen,
while since I've read it,
it's
but
3 feet from me. I could go and get it
go and
if you
grab
would
it.
like.
Go and grab it. Yeah, and then because I think this is what people are going to be surprised at when they realize.
Well, I do I buy dictionaries all the time, all the time, because I've noticed the changing definitions.
No, I had a Black's Law Dictionary with me when I was in Canada, and it was very much a go-to thing. And then when I moved house, I got rid of a lot of stuff, and I don't know why that ended up going in there. I regret getting rid of it because it was always something very interesting to pick up, and a word like person or many words that were in there that are used on a daily basis, especially in legal terms, where especially if you were going to court and you listen to exactly what the judge says or what's being said within the court, if you know what those terms are and you know what those words are, and this is what I was on about with the legalese, when they are defined as something very different to what we think, it has very much a very different connotation and certainly a very different bearing on how that court case can come out. And, most people are never going to educate themselves, unfortunately, in the way that these things are defined. But it's,
We'll even look at equity versus equality, right? So
yeah,
we take we've just shifted it. We've shifted equality of opportunity into communism,
yeah,
right? By changing a few letters.
that's it. But it's a trap. Again, it's another trap. And whether it be a contractual trap under contractual law or business law or however it's done, if you go in there not knowing what these words are, and obviously this is why people hire lawyers because they find it very overwhelming to be able to go into a courtroom and represent themselves within that courtroom. But I'm sure you have seen over the years now that these slight misconceptions of what we're educated in the general world of what these words mean and what they actually mean when it comes to legal definition certainly points towards everything being a corporate operation and business, you know.
Well, look at patenting DNA, right? And so then if you own a patent on a section of DNA and you insert that DNA into injections that go into humans,
Yeah.
and then those DNA integrate with our genome, whether it makes misfold proteins, causes cancer, does all kinds of has all kinds of biological consequences that include death. The legal consequence that we have to think about is the idea that, well, are we then an owned part of a patent system, right? So there's all kinds of parts of the law that I see weaponized. So here's person,
Does it say,
and
does person say see something else?
see National Labor Relations Act, 29 USCA
Yeah.
152, and the Uniform Partnership Act 2. In general usage, a human being, i.e., natural person.
Yeah.
So if we're not a natural person and we're a transhuman and
Yeah.
we're a modified person, right? And we cease to be natural because we're not born out of a family, but we're podded through artificial placental technology, which is, there's patents on that.
Yeah.
Um, through by statute term may include labor organization, partnership, association, corporation, legal representative, trustees in bankruptcy, or receivers.
Yeah.
So
In my Black's Law dictionary, it was an older Black's Law dictionary. It used to say sea monster.
see what?
It used to say sea monster.
M
Under,
O N
yeah,
Monster?
monster. Yeah. So
I don't understand.
I didn't understand it, but apparently under law, people are seen under the eyes of the law and under that very system as monster. Now, at the time, is it sea monster with your eyes or is it sea monster, SEA, sea monster? Now, this brings me to the likes of this question here, is the Corporation of Canada operating under maritime admiralty law or lex mercatoria?
Foreign governments, by the way, are also, there's a whole, goes on forever on person, by the way.
Yeah.
Uh,
But at the end of
but
the day,
on, it,
when we enter that courtroom and we enter the dock, um, and that courtroom is being operated under a maritime law which doesn't apply to a natural human being, but will apply to a person, and the person being all caps, from birth certificate and anything within bills and stuff. Are the courtrooms operating under a law that people are unaware of?
oh, it's quite possible. I did do international law and law of the sea, but that's been, over 25 years ago. So
Yeah.
I know the vocabulary is interesting, but you're onto something with respect to the reduction of life into and rights into corporate entities where corporations
Yeah.
have really, that is corporate law, I think, has altered, like corporations and small businesses. It was, the idea of having a limited liability corporation to, reduce your liability, hold the liabilities in the hands of um, in the business, that made sense for small businesses starting out. Small businesses are all being wiped out. And so all you have is these big corporations.
Mhm.
And so they can certainly game the jurisdictions to their advantage, game the laws to their advantage.
Yeah.
The deception, I think, to the average person is large. I mean, there's no ends of areas, but I will say one thing that was really important that I did discover was I was looking at provisions, 666 provisions, just because I come, across Bill Gates 666 patent, which is a slavery patent.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what would be the worst 666 provision in Canada under a statute that I could find? So I said, oh, for shits and giggles, it's going to be the Bank Act, right? So I I go to the Bank Act 666 is that, they don't need to grant themselves extra powers. They don't need, a new bylaw or charter.
Yeah.
And I didn't really fully, grasp the significance of the provision, but I was in the Bank Act. So I said, well, I'm just going to keep reading. And I think it was 678 thereabouts.
Yeah.
And it's called the sunset provision of the Bank Act.
Yeah, I
And
remember looking into that as well.
yeah, and so it used to be that every 5 years they would extend the Bank Act so that all bank holding companies cease operation on X date, and that's the sunset provision
Yeah.
of the Bank Act. So
And I do think
in
that,
Canada's Bank Act, as of September 18th, it had not been updated on any legislative site that I could find. It said the expiration of the date was going to be June 30th, 2025, and they hadn't updated it.
yeah,
And so then fast forward, it was sometime in October, and it had been updated. And before this, they were updating it every 5 years. They extended it by 1 year. So banks, holding companies cease operations on June 30th, 2026. And it's a foreordained date, right? And so I thought that was very interesting. So all of our laws and like you could go, that Bank Act is huge. And so I have all kinds of friends that work in banking and on one side or another, in corporate or in different areas. And I said to them, what about the sunset? Never heard of it. Don't know about it. Right.
yeah.
And so that, is that did they think they were going to get their entry point of CBDC in Canada, get that digital ID moved ahead so that the 2025 date would have worked? And then they realized at some point, we are pushing back. So keep pushing back, everybody.
Oh,
Go
yeah.
back to paper bills.
Yeah.
Think of everything that you can let out your life.
Yeah, definitely. And that ties in definitely with the fact that I do believe that the majority of the banks are already bankrupt because of the amount of debt they're holding. It's unsustainable. But also with that as well, we've got the Bail-in Act, which was enacted into 2013. And the Bail-in Act is the facility to take anything that is held by the bank. So if you have money in your account, it then becomes the bank's. And this was put in 2013 in every country around the world that had a central bank over it. This was provisions in preparation, ready for what is coming, and people don't realize that. And it's basically going to give us a good taste of what happened in the crash of the 1930s. When the banks closed and just never opened again and everyone lost everything. And this has actually already happened. I do think that they're doing a test bed thing. There was a bank in Lindsay in the US, which went under, and most people again are unaware that this has happened. This went under within the last couple of weeks, this bank in Lindsay, and there was millions of dollars in there and everybody lost everything under that very Bail-in Act. And this is what people need to be very well aware of, what's coming down the pipeline, which is why we try and tell people, make sure you get any money that you have into the likes of physical precious metals that you actually hold, because if you don't hold it and they pull the plug on this, which is very much in the plans to do so, you're going to lose everything that you think is of value when your notes, promissory notes that you carry from the bank, become absolutely worthless. And that is going to be a very unfortunate situation for those who choose to ignore the warnings that we do put out there. Now, we're going to wrap this up now.
I should just say one aspect about that Bail-in Act that people should need to know also is that they don't do a set off. So if you have a mortgage and so you have a line of credit, you have a HELOC, you have any kind of debt owed to the bank, they take that and they say that, well, we failed this is the you are credit, those are our credit accounts that we are taking from you. They
Yeah.
sweep what's in the account. So you before you go into precious metals, reduce your debt. Like try to be debt free. I mean, that is try to live debt free is the only thing I can say. And start aligning yourself in terms of, your physical environment. If costs are going to get really expensive,
Yeah.
find someone you already trust to share those costs with you, right? Like
Yeah. I
get a
also
room.
look at it. I also look at it from another angle. Whereas if you do have debt, let's say you have $100,000 on a mortgage right now,
Yeah.
and you can't physically pay that mortgage off because it's impossible, which is the whole reason why you have a mortgage in the first place. And to become debt free of that would mean selling the very property that you have chosen to live in with your family. The offset of this is if you buy gold or silver, and it is expensive currently,
Yeah.
but the value of this is going to increase the moment a monetary system goes down. The safe haven has always been the rush into precious metals. Now, if you go out and you spend, several $1,000s on gold or silver, should the debt in a reset situation be held above your head still as owing, and the value of that gold and silver due to the financial increments of possible hyperinflation or the resetting of the monetary system, let's say that ounce of gold that you paid currently at a rate of probably around 2,600 US dollars for, all of a sudden becomes $50,000, and maybe you own two of them. Guess what you can exchange and write your debt off at a cost of around about $5,000 in today's money. And people need to realize that these offsets for these financial instruments is pretty much a very savvy business move moving forward, should that happen. And if it doesn't happen and the debt isn't held over you at the end of the day, the money in precious metals that you have should serve you well moving forward in regards to its actual value, and create that foundation of building something from that. And that's why I recommend it to people as well as an offset. It's certainly a very good tool to have at your disposal heading into very uncertain times financially.
I've never considered it that way, but you sound a lot uh, you know, better educated on that scenario. And in what you've said actually does make a lot of sense for sure.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to, yeah, agree with you.
Offset it.
Yeah, yeah.
Offset it and protect yourself, because I mean this isn't the first time this has happened. Situations with the Weimar Republic and Poland and countries that have gone into hyperinflation over the years, when we've had monetary collapse, people have been able to buy a property, literally go out and buy yourself a new property with a single gold coin.
Oh,
Because
wow.
yeah, and that's it. When people look back at history and see that that was possible, it certainly reinforces the fact that holding this now not only as a nest egg, but it is a very protectional thing to have at your disposal in very uncertain times. And we're very well aware that there's never been any financial instruments, certainly within the realms of a fiat currency, that has ever survived. Every fiat currency in known history has always gone under. It was never
Mm.
survived, and it is always replaced. We're seeing China, we're seeing India, we're seeing Russia, we're seeing everybody right now buying thousands of tons of precious metals. And people really need to question why that is, because everyone is strategically positioning themselves for what is coming. Whether that comes in 2025, 2026, we're not really sure, because the very people that control this financial system, we're going right back to the Bank of International Settlements again, and every central bank that controls every government around the world financially. And that is the kingpin of control that always has been. And if you can beat them at their own game, that's what I advise people to do.
Well, and having skills, right?
Yes,
Knowing,
absolutely.
right? Having skills.
Yeah,
Yeah.
energy exchanges and moving forward with basically building a good community around you. So we'll wrap this up now. As a
Thank
parting gesture, if you could say to people to inspire some confidence in them moving forward, or give them the confidence to stand up and speak out in 2025, what would be your message to everybody out there to do during this very turbulent year that we're going to face?
Yeah, you have the strength within yourself and you have the words and have confidence. I believe that, our tools are right at our disposal. So, your tools, what you're good at, what you're, I'm a lawyer, but maybe someone else is an electrician. Maybe, use the tools at your disposal and you will know what to do when you open up your heart to God. And to do that, both for the confidence that you need to speak and for the strength that you need to know you're not alone and that there's so many millions of us. The dam is going to break. And, we know the history of Babylon, and we know what we're up against, but we also know that we're not alone in this world. And, if God so loved us, that we're more important than the bird in the sky, would he really leave us all, humanity, all of us, you know, um, at the whims of these monsters? No, he would not. And, we were never promised immortality here on earth. Never. So that, when they come for your mortality in any way, if that's what they threaten eventually, our mortality was never given to us. And so we have to be not afraid of our mortality. And that's really, the promise of safety was always the illusion that we become immortal by listening to them.
Yeah.
And
And
it's just a trick.
that's it. And as I always say, we're all a fractal of God, and I'm absolutely certain that He doesn't expect us to lie down and just take this. So people really need to start educating them, standing up for themselves and protecting themselves moving forward. Lisa, this has been an incredible talk again. I look forward again to picking another topic in the future
Yes,
for us to discuss and cover. As I say, follow the link underneath to watch that documentary, which is probably going
yes.
to surprise a lot of people in Canada to its actual legal status and the power that it does have over the people. And until next time, as we always say here on the Atlantic Underground podcast, believe nothing and question everything. And thank you once more.
Okay, thank you. Bye, everybody.